This episode of Engineering the Future is brought to you by BMS Canada Risk Services, OSPI's trusted insurance broker for member liability coverage. BMS understands the risks that engineers face in their practice and provides OSPI members access to leading insurance products, advice, and support from experienced brokers, as well as risk management resources. For more information on how BMS can help protect you and even your business, visit OSPI's website or ospi.bmsgroup.com.
This podcast is brought to you by OSPI, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, the advocacy body for professional engineers in the engineering community in Ontario.
Welcome to Engineering the Future, a podcast presented by the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. I am your host, Jerome James. Today, I'm joined by Matthew Davis, Manager of Capital Projects and Program, Transportation Services at the City of Toronto, and a member of the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, OSPI. Matthew, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? What motivated you to become an engineer in the first place? And did you have any role models in your personal or academic life that motivated you?
Sure, thanks. So why did I want to become an engineer? I actually told this story at my P.Eng initiation here for PEO. So I'll repeat it again for folks that may not have heard it.
Excellent.
When I grew up in a small town in New Jersey that was it's suburbs of Philadelphia in the United States, and there was a lot of oil refineries. And the town that I lived in, we had our high school that was, I guess you would call it, north of the tracks. All of the folks that I knew, for the most part, that when we walked to high school, we lived south of the tracks.
Right.
And the tracks actually they literally bisected the town because those tracks were feeding the oil refineries on the Delaware River, right? So we would have trains that were about a mile, 2 miles long. I have to say miles because, we're in the United States. And they would park, and we would literally have times where we would go to school. This huge train would be parked in between us and the school, and we actually would have to get late passes from the train conductor to let us go into school on time, or to give us an excuse for why we were late sometimes. Wow. And I started looking at, what could I do as like an engineer to try to fix this, right? Like the road was fairly small, and the area was built up around it. So there was no bridge or tunnel going on at that point. But there was another road that was a little bit closer to the river, a little bit closer to the refineries, that you could actually engineer into a bridge. And so I actually had that on if I showed you my yearbook from I'll just blur that out. What you'll see is I actually say this in my yearbook when I'm about to graduate, that I want to do something to put a bridge there somewhere in town to eliminate that issue. So I think that sparked it. They actually did build a bridge ultimately, like after I left. Amazing. And graduated. Yeah. So I think I was ahead of my time a little bit.
Very nice.
But so that was a big part of it. But it also spoke to and I don't know how it was here in Canada at that time, but in the United States, we had, histories of redlining, for example. And so a lot of folks that I grew up with were living south of the tracks for a reason, right? Mm-hmm. And so it kind of sparked my interest there. Like, why is it that every city I go to, folks that I'm living with, folks that I'm hanging around with, are near railroad tracks, are near a dump, are near something that's not necessarily desirable for, everyday living, right? So It's the engineering side, but it's also the decision-making side that really got me curious into this field. So I think those were the two drivers for the most part.
That's an interesting story. Some people would kind of draw parallels to the whole 8 Mile track kind of story that was made popular by the movie 8 Mile and Eminem's story, knowing that things could be drastically different from one side of a road to the other. And that's interesting that motivated you.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you believe the value that engineers bring to society at large?
Yeah. So, this has changed over the years for me, right? Like when I first started in engineering, I mean, I'm a civil engineer. A lot of civil engineers start out wanting to build bridges. That was one of them. And then I hit structural analysis in university, and it this wasn't nice to me. So I changed gears and went into transportation. And I think that, so speaking from my experience in transportation, brings a ton of value. I guess I'll touch on a couple of things. One of the first things in terms of value that it brings is it always engineering, at least in transportation side, informs so many types of decisions that go into, as I mentioned a bit earlier, they play into to all kinds of parts of people's everyday lives, right? How do you get to work? How do you make it to the doctor or hospital when you're sick? How do you get your groceries? How do you buy necessities that you absolutely need for everyday life, right?
Right.
And which way can you do it? How much is that going to cost you? Do you need to buy a car? Do you need to invest in a transit pass? Perhaps there's so many things that you don't really think about because they come second nature to you, right? You wake up, you have to do these things. But without an engineer, right? And I would give some credit to the planners as well, but without an engineer in the background, right? A lot of these things remain either undefined or, I think worse, you end up with facilities, transportation facilities that may not be able to fully manage in a safe and effective way the type of activity that you would experience on a road or street. So I think the value is that it really contributes to the quality of life that of the general public. I think it contributes to the safety of the general public. And I think ultimately it serves as a check and balance. And, we can get into this or not, but it serves as a check or balance to, aggressive zoning, aggressive, development. Because if you don't have an engineering there to say, hey, you want to put up this, 100-story tower,
right,
in the middle of something like an engineer will have to come in and say, I'm sorry, that's just out of context, and it will, really burden the network, whether it's transportation, water, whatever. So that's why I say these things that we sometimes take for granted, I think are some of the things that engineers bring the most value to, right?
Right.
And and if I can just add one more thing, I guess, in my current work that we're doing here at the City of Toronto, and this is why I said this has changed over time, because now at the stage that I am in my career, I've done a lot. I've been in the business over 20 years. I've done a lot that I'm proud of. I've also seen some parts of the engineering world that I'm not so proud of, right? And what I've been able to do at my current job is look at things through an equity lens and look at it as an engineer, right? And some people don't really put those two things together, right? Like you can't,
Right.
How are you an engineer, a trained engineer, but you're applying equity lenses to, all your projects and your, planning, your project planning and programming. But I feel like sometimes, and again,
and
everybody
that gives you a particular perspective while doing your job, because you're looking at it through a different lens that someone may miss the issues that you're taking into consideration.
That's exactly what I was heading to, right? Like if you're, I could be any other, I could have taken any other career path and may still have arrived at a place like where I'm at now, but I wouldn't have that perspective of knowing the engineering side, the planning side of these things, to know the trade-offs, right? Because the engineers like myself, we do trade-offs all the time in a scientific and engineering level. But when you bring this social aspect to it, you kind of have to have a bit of familiarity in all of those areas in order to make effective trade-off decisions between how you apply equity and what it means to the engineering and science part of it. So it's a huge, I'm unbiased too, right? I went to school for engineering and, I've been in the business 20 years, but it really feels like it brings a ton of value in a lot of different ways. So
excellent. I'm going to hold you to that. I want a specific example that you bring to the table, but before, from a diverse lens. Yeah. But before we hit in that, I'll let you think about that example for a moment. Could you tell us exactly where engineering takes place in a civil project, so to speak? Because I feel like most of the public sees road work and civil projects, and they interact with, the dump truck that's going down the highway, or the guy that's holding the sign saying slow, stop, slow. And they don't necessarily see what part, like the paperwork and the engineer is doing. Is he on this work site? Is he a project manager? Where is the engineer, the P.Eng, the guy that's creating the concepts? Where does he come into play?
That's a good question, and I you may kill me for the answer, but the answer is actually in all of those segments that you mentioned. So, but let me be a little bit more specific, right? So when we start like a regular, roadway project, I will say, and I always have to give credit. 'Cause I used to work in city planning, and I did a lot of work in the planning realm. So I have to give a lot of credit to planners, because a lot of planners work with engineers like myself to develop what we call like conceptual designs, right? And conceptual layouts for new roads, or to retrofit roads with, let's say like a cycling lane or a bus lane or something like that. Because there's a bigger picture that you need to consider, right? Like it's not just your street and your road, especially in a city like Toronto.
Right.
It's not just your street or your road. It's how your street and your road interact with the larger network, right? And you need to be mindful of that. And I think that's where some people, and I've stopped using this term. I used to use the term plan engineer, but I don't really do it. You're an engineer or you're a planner. You just might know, one or the other, or you might know a little bit of both. But I think it starts there, right? And I'll just give a bit of personal context to this. When I was in university and I went to school in North Carolina State in Raleigh, North Carolina, we, I had a great mentor down there who told me, he said, look, we're in this civil engineering. I'm going to teach you roadway design. I'm going to teach you traffic engineering. I'm going to teach you planning. He was like, if you want to, I never forget this advice. He said, if you want to keep the lights on in your house, right, and you don't want to take a risk, do the roadway design, right? Take something from conceptual all the way to 100% design, and then you'll have a job for life. You'll help with the bidding, right? And there's engineers on the side, like you mentioned, on the construction side that will bid for a project that's been fully designed. And then you have construction engineers who are also civil, who actually go out, design plans to build, any piece of infrastructure. So that was his advice. But he also said, but if you want to be in those rooms where the decisions are made to even start with those roads, or what those roads are supposed to look like, then your career takes another track, and I feel like I followed that track. So you have engineers, which I think in my old sort of lifetime before working at the city of Toronto, we used to call that pre-construction. So everything dealing with all types of issues prior to the people you see in dump trucks and everything like that. That is all a skill set of, the people have these skill sets of planning. They have preliminary design, and then they start the process, right, for advancing the design from preliminary to 10, 30, 60, 90% design, and ultimately full delivery. And then again, you have the other side, which is more visible, where you have folks out there, you have resident engineers, right, like on site, like you mentioned, who are civil engineers who manage the construction and the progress for these projects. So we're everywhere, so to speak. And it's a shame that people in pre-construction don't really, like, I'm not out there in front of anything for the most part on big projects, but I kind of sit back and I say, okay, well, I know I had something to do with, something that launched that project and allowed it to become, what it ultimately was, what it ultimately was meant to become, right?
Right.
All over the place, I think we are.
Oh, excellent. It's good to know. Good to hear. I'm going to revisit that diversity lens piece. Right. Are you ready for an example?
Sure.
Okay, great.
So you want an example of how we bring diversity into an engineering project? Is that
as a Black man in construction in the planning piece, how has your diversity lens lent to a better outcome or a perceived inclusionary piece that may have been overlooked if someone else wasn't in that role?
All right. So I don't know how long you have in your podcast, but we can really start talking this up a bit. But I'll start with one example, and if that's not enough, I got plenty more. So one of the things that we're doing at the city now, and this is where I talked about the engineering lens has to be combined with, again, whether like I have some lived experience in this field, right, being a Black engineer, but also like just some knowledge of sociodemographics in a particular area. You kind of have to be aware of this too. But I'm going to give you this one example. So in the city of Toronto, what we've been doing in transportation services, what we've been doing is trying to say we spend, a pretty decent sum of money every year in the millions dealing with our roadway network, right? Be it roadway maintenance, or we use the maintenance, we call it state of good repair program. We'll utilize that state of good repair program because it's ongoing and we're constantly fixing roads to identify opportunities for enhancing roads even, right? So if we're going to go out and repave or reconstruct the road, wow, okay, this is a good opportunity to put a bike lane there, right? Or do something, widen the sidewalk, something like that. So we took a look at what we call pavement quality, right? Of what we call the pavement quality index. And that's literally just a measurement of how good, the asphalt is, what the quality of the asphalt is on a particular road. If you see it really cracked up and it's, cracking apart and you're getting potholes, the pavement quality index or PQI is probably very low. And we need to schedule it for some type of intervention, be it a reconstruction or resurfacing. Obviously, the opposite is true. If you're pretty smooth ride, the quality is high, no need to really schedule any reconstruction. So here's where I'm going to bring this all together. So the city of Toronto has what we call neighborhood improvement areas, and they were identified through the city of Toronto's strong neighborhood strategy. Okay. These are areas where it's been identified where you have significant populations of people, perhaps are low income, perhaps you have overrepresentation, if you will, of visible minorities or new immigrants, or something that some part of the what I like to call like the Ontario Human Rights Code protected persons sort of thing, right, where you have all these people congregating or living in an area, and for one reason or another, and it's not because they are visible minorities or because of low income, whatever the reason is, where they're living, we need to do better in terms of supporting those neighborhoods, right?
Right.
Those neighborhood improvement areas, we did and this is when I came on to this job, we initiated what we call like a baselining of our local roads and major roads program. While doing that, what we were able to find is that there was, and because that's why I want to bring this all to you in one, hopefully a nice bow. What we saw was that we looked at the past 10 years of spending and, sort of looked at that in parallel to the pavement quality indices in roads that were in neighborhood improvement areas versus non-neighborhood improvement areas. And what we found over 10 years is that there was a difference of about 7 or 8% difference on average of quality degradation in the neighborhood improvement areas, right? Now, and I'm going to be fair to you, especially coming from the United States, and we have cities down there that, that disparity would be like 10, 20%, 30%, and it, not a good situation. So on average, 8-9% difference is actually not terrible, but right. I manage the capital program. I'm responsible for making sure that our money and our investments are basically coming out and delivering equitable outcomes across the city. So when I see this, right, what do? I see this information. I start talking about it with my senior management and the other managers that are responsible for asset management, dealing with the pavement quality. And we start to put together a program to make this more equitable. And this is why this is going to be important. When I say make it more equitable, what I mean is what level of effort do we have to apply so that 2 or 3 years from now, or maybe 5 years from now, whatever horizon we have, we can bring the disparity down between neighborhood improvement areas and non-neighborhood improvement areas, right? So that the road quality is on par. Now, last thing I'll say on this, the reason why this is so important, right? Because some people this is the engineering side, and people are probably, glazing eyes over, but this is where I brought this lens into this.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. At OSPI, we're here for you, making sure government, media, and the public are listening to the voice of engineers. You can learn more at ospi.on.ca.
When we start to talk about pavement quality, if we have pavement quality that is, suspect or low, that inhibits the type of improvements we can do, right? In terms of putting a cycling lane or a bus lane or things like that, because we can't just paint over, you have
to fix it
bad
first
asphalt.
and then do that. And that could set back projects and planning years.
Well, that's what happens. And this is where, so we've done this baselining thing, this baselining exercise on a number of capital programs in the city of Toronto in transportation services. And this, by applying that lens that you were asking me about, where I know that maybe not in Toronto, but I've been around long enough and I've worked in enough cities to know that there is going to be some disparity. Now, whether it's 7 or 8% in pavement quality or whatever, what ends up happening is underrepresented communities end up with underinvestment of infrastructure. And it could be due to access to, government. It could be people not wanting to report, right? If you have an area where you have a lot of new immigrants, they may not feel comfortable, right? Talking to officials. Right. And there are so many drivers behind this. And this is why I wanted to give you this as the first example. If you want another one, we can talk about it. But the reason why I wanted to use this one was because the engineering work is, let's review, what we did out in the field, how much we spent, what the pavement quality index resulted in after that we put in these efforts. But as you hopefully can tell, and hopefully the folks listening to this can tell, the outcomes that spread out from that finding are just like so numerous, and you would never even think about them unless you applied this diversity lens, as you called it, or an equity lens, as we call it in the city, to that type of work. So I would submit that as an example where we were not looking at that before my unit was created. And we started it as soon as I got here. And I just want to, again, thank the folks that work with me on my team, because it took literally a village of folks to bring all this data together and synthesize it in a way that allowed us to reach these conclusions and to start setting the path to improve things in the future.
Right. That's an excellent story. And the way you ended it, you have to bring data and statistics and put it together in a way that shows unequivocally the disparity to upper management, and that they have no other option to act and make things turn things around.
I like to say we make their job a little bit easier, right? They don't have to think about it, but yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah, that was a great example. And I'm sure that there's more down the pipeline, and you're doing great work to infuse those equity ideas into your everyday work. I want to move on to another question.
Sure.
What kind of advice would you give Black students today that are in high school, finishing high school, first year university, that may be playing with the idea of becoming an engineer, looking at careers in STEM? What did you do right? What would you have changed in your academic career? What kind of advice would you give?
Sure. So I'm going to, in full disclosure, I didn't grow up here, right? So I'm learning. I have a 13-year-old daughter right now who's going to transition into 9th grade next year. I'm learning about the Ontario school system, right? And how people, historically have been, streamed into, was it like academic versus applied, or all kinds of different levels. And I got to be honest, as someone outside looking in, it was kind of shocking to see that go on at a system level, where literally, if folks don't have their act together by ninth grade, like it just changes their trajectory pretty much for basically forever, right?
Mhm.
So that's I wanted to say that, because I don't want to give advice. I'm going to give advice, but I wanted to make sure folks understood, right? Like if you're in school and you have taken this approach or you've been streamed into an approach where it does not get you to university, my understanding is you can fight back, right? Like you can push back if you're working with your parents, and you're demonstrating the aptitude, you can get out of that stream, right? And I didn't know that. Like I've literally been on the phone with guidance counselors all across like Southern Ontario, because I'm, looking to move and things. I'm thinking like, how do we do this? And they're all telling me, please, like my daughter is, luckily I'm lucky that my daughter's very intelligent. She loves school, but at the same time, it's like, not everybody's coming from that background, and you may either have been a result of being streamed earlier, or, perhaps you're not doing all that well in school now. All I'm saying is, for the high school students that are in that could be listening, like if this is something that interests you, civil engineering, first, don't limit yourself to, and I'm not cracking on you, Jerome, but like, don't limit yourself to what you think you see out there as this is civil. I'm going to advocate for civil engineering because I'm a civil engineer. Just because all you see is dump trucks and cranes, that is not the full thing.
Right.
If you really want to know more, right, ask someone, right? I always offer, like, before COVID, I used to be in night meetings all the time as part of the city, and I used to offer this all the time. Like, look, we'd do our project, and then afterwards, I say, hey, people would come to me and say, oh, I didn't know, and I'm going to speak directly towards Black students. There are people who go to community meetings and they'll say, I didn't even know what you did was a job, right? Like, how do I get into that? And I will give them my card, and I'll do as much as I can with the limited resources I have.
Excellent.
To kind of just like put them on the right path. But I want to go back to the actual advice. Like, find out everything you can about a particular interest area that you have. You may be struggling grades wise now, right? But it doesn't have to always be like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you can take steps, you can move forward to get yourself in a better position to go to university, right? But
it's all about understanding that you can reach out, you can get supports. It
Yes.
doesn't necessarily, I think they thought in their mind that, we're doing a service almost.
Right.
Like, we don't want these children to suffer in too difficult of class and feel stupid and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But making them feel like they're not adequate is bad on the other side, that they can't
Absolutely.
they can never achieve something. I just wanted to say like a little like personal anecdote. I remember when I was getting ready to start grade 11, and I went to a guidance counselor meeting, and I at that point I was thinking about sciences and thinking about engineering. I was like okay at math, and I was like, okay, I can do this, and there's nothing else that much interesting. And I was advised to take university college math instead of the UC fully university classes. And I'm like, at the time I was like, thanks, but no thanks. Like, I walked out of there being like, he doesn't have my best interest at heart. Like, he doesn't know what my motivation and drive is. I need a path forward. I want support to get me there. And I just remember thinking that was the worst advice. But people take that advice in, and they're like, well, he should know what I'm capable of. And at that point, if it doesn't align up with your goals, you need to get a second opinion or find out ways to make your dreams happen, whether that be trying to get a tutor or finding out other opportunities after class or to, get those extra credits, because it's the kids that go get that extra credit that succeed in the world.
Oh, absolutely. And they have the work ethic, right? And they demonstrate it early. And that work ethic can carry you through all types of troubles, right? I guess just to with the advice, what I was going to say for young folks, just to kind of put a bow on this one, is ultimately I just want to make sure people understand, like, you cannot, it kind of echoes what you were saying. You can't take one person's word as law and as guiding your life. If you have a passion for something like this, or if you have an interest, the number one, explore it, because you may find, for example, oh, I want to be a civil engineer. And then you start to look into it and you say, nah, that's not for me, but you cancel it out. So it's not a waste of time, right? To understand what you don't like. So like that, I think that's a big thing. And I think that when it comes to school, and again, I'm speaking as someone who is just sort of being indoctrinated into the Ontario sort of way of school. I'm going to say this, and people might not like it, but you all have it so easy here, right? Like, I was talking to a guidance counselor who told me that you have this system where when you get ready to graduate, it's like a clearinghouse for applications, right? For all Ontario universities. And you don't have to take a SAT or an ACT test like we do in the US to, get it. Like, if you all understood, and maybe you do, because I know perhaps some of the listeners are either they may have went to a university in the United States or whatever. The SAT is such a hurdle. Like, I'll tell you, when I was growing up, and, not embarrassed to say, didn't come from a lot of means. One of my good friend's mother paid for my SAT test because I couldn't afford to take it. And it was only through her that I was able to actually get into university, right? But what if I didn't have him as a friend, right? Like, I don't know what would happen. So, like, understand that you have opportunity here. I'm just going to speak for Ontario. You have opportunities here that in many other developed nations you don't get. And I would just try to take advantage of those, right? And I think and I would say, there's going to be a lot. And I told you, we could have a lot of time on this podcast, Jerome, sorry. There are so many obstacles that will get in your way, even if you are successful in making it to university. And I would tell you, like, I am standing right here as an example. It took me about 6 or 7 years to finally graduate in a bachelor's. I transferred schools, but I had some personal tragedies, going on at the time. But I didn't stop, and my family,
limit you.
Yeah, you got to keep going. My family supported me throughout, and ultimately, here I am talking to you in Canada, right? Jersey guy from a refinery town. So don't give up on it. And then the last thing I'll say is, if you make it through university, right, and you get that job, please, 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 and I say this every time someone asks me this question, Jerome, take the time to get your license. Like, if you're going to be an engineer, do everything you can to set yourself up so that you ultimately get licensure. Absolutely. Because if you don't, you'll get passed over for promotions all the time. If you're one of these folks where, you're looking at, like, I'm a black male, black female, and look, I'm not getting promotions because you're black. Okay, perhaps that's part of it. No one's going to tell you that engineering doesn't have racism in it, right? In anywhere. But what I would say is, before you say that, get your license first.
Set yourself up for success.
Exactly. And then if you get your license and you're producing, you're putting it out there, and you're not getting promoted, okay, then you can probably start thinking, like, okay, what are the other reasons why? But I can guarantee you, folks will hold that license or lack of licensure over your head as long as possible, because you're going to keep working, right? You're going to keep generating great work, regardless of if you have a license or not. And that, if you're working for a private firm, that's billable hours, that's over, they're making money on that regardless. So you make your money, right? Make sure you do what you need to do to position yourself for future success. Get a license. I I just plead with people to get a license. Do not just let it go. And I'm going to tell you, as a foreign graduate, getting a license in PEO is extremely difficult. But ultimately, after many tries, I was able to get through. It was that structures. Remember I told you about the structures?
Right.
It was that structures that got me. But ultimately, I got through. So I would say if I can do it, I'm pretty sure others can. And I'm here too, right? Like, I'm hoping that that's one of the reasons why I joined OSPI, actually, was to be able to like involve myself more in outreach outside of what I already do in the city of Toronto, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm here to help.
So much good advice, so little time. Thank you so much. One last question. Why did you join OSPI? And I think you touched on it a little bit at the end there, but give us an example of why you, and the answer of why you joined OSPI.
Yeah, so part of it, like I said, was to participate more in the outreach side of professional engineering, right? And get outside the Toronto bubble, if you will. And I guess connect with a larger group of people. You're not all civil engineers, right? You're not all City of Toronto employees. There's people from a wide array of areas. I learned about OSPI years ago when I first came to Canada, but I didn't have my professional engineer's license. I had 10 licenses back in the US, but I didn't have a P.Eng, so I couldn't join OSPI, right? At the time. So I kind of aspired to do so. And then I'm going to give a shout out to Andrea Carmona. She's no longer with OSPI now. But when I think I got invited to speak at a ITE function down at, I don't want to say McMaster.
Okay.
She was there with another one of her colleagues, and talking to her about some of the initiatives that OSPI got into when it came to equity and it came to outreach, it really impressed me. And so it took me some time, but after talking with her really solidified that for me that I need to join, right? Mm-hmm. And I need to, there's always a risk, Jerome, with like putting yourself out there and being visible, especially as a Black engineer. But you know what? Like the benefits, I think, to the overall profession and to Black folks looking to get into the profession far outweigh the risks. So OSPI is a bigger platform, and I just felt like it's time for me to, I'm getting a little gray in the beard. It's time for me to kind of share some information and share advice that hopefully others can pick up and take forward and use for their success.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time today. This podcast was well needed. I think the amount of knowledge and advice and lived experience that you've shared today will definitely help those coming up the ranks and thinking
Great.
About a career in engineering from all diverse backgrounds. And hopefully we will see more equity infused into everyday life through your engineering and other people like you trying to make the world a better place. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I've just been speaking with Matthew Davis, Manager of Capital Projects and Program Transportation Services at the City of Toronto and a member of OSPI. My name is Jerome James. You've been listening to Engineering the Future. Thank you for listening.
From all of us at OSPI, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, thanks for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.